Conservation of biodiversity. Biodiversity is the shorter form of biological diversity. Simply it means the diversity or variety of plants and animals and other living organisms in a particular area or a region. Everything that lives on an ecosystem is part of a web of life, including humans. Each species of vegetation and each creature has a place on the earth and plays a vital role in the circle of life. Plants, animals and insect species interact and depend upon each other for what each offers, such as food, shelter, oxygen and soil enrichment. Maintaining a wide diversity of species in each ecosystem is necessary to preserve the web of life that sustains all living things. The biodiversity of planet Earth is the total variability of life forms. Currently, around 2 million extant species have been estimated on the Earth. Biodiversity is the degree of variation of life. This can refer to genetic variation, species variation, or ecosystem variation. You might have heard about hotspots. A biodiversity hotspot is a biogeographic region with a significant reservoir of biodiversity that is under the threat from humans. Biodiversity generally tends to cluster in hotspots and has been increasing throughout the time, but will be likely to have slow tender in the future. The term hotspot was introduced in 1988 by Dr. Sabina Work. While hotspots are spread all over the world, the majority are forested areas and most are located in the tropics. The International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, is an international organization dedicated to finding pragmatic solutions to our most pressing environment and development challenges. The organization publishes the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species, which assess the conservation status of species. IUCN is the world's oldest and largest global environmental network with more than 1,000 government and NGO member organizations. It has almost 11,000 volunteer scientists in more than 160 countries. IUCN supports scientific research and manages field projects globally. It brings governments, non-government organizations, United Nations agencies, companies, local communities together to develop and implement conservative policies. The Union's headquarters is located at Gland in Switzerland near Geneva. IUCN's stated vision is a just world that value and conserve the nature. Its mission is to influence, encourage and assist societies throughout the world to conserve nature and to ensure that any use of natural resources is equitable and ecologically sustainable. A number of species you can see on the earth. According to Mora and colleagues, the total number of terrestrial species is estimated to be beyond 9 million, while the number of ocean species is much lower, estimated around 2 million. It is estimated that there are 2.2 lakh vascular plants, 7 to 10 lakh marine species, 20 to 30 million insects, 5 to 10 million bacteria, 2 to 3 million fungi, and 1 million mites. Since the rate of extinction has increased tremendously, many extant species may become extinct before they are described. Generally, biodiversity is classified according to 3 fundamental and hierarchical levels. They are genetic biodiversity, species biodiversity, and ecosystem biodiversity. Threats to biodiversity. A number of threats affect biodiversity today. The most authoritative classification in use today is IUCN's classification of direct threats which have been adopted by a number of international conservation organizations such as US Nature Conservation, US Wildlife Fund, Conservation International, and BirdLife International. The major threats to global biodiversity are discussed in the following manner. The first one is habitat destruction. Habitat destruction has played a key role in extinctions, especially related to tropical forest restrictions. Factors contributing to habitat loss are overpopulation, deforestation, pollution, global warming, and climatic change. Introduced and invasive species are another threat. Barriers such as large rivers, seas, oceans, mountains, and deserts encourage diversity by enabling independent evolution on either side of the barrier via the process of allopathic specialization. The term invasive species is applied to species that breach the natural barriers that would normally keep them constrained. Without barriers, such species occupy new territory, often supplementing native species by occupying their niches or by using resources that would normally sustain native species. Species are increasingly being moved by humans, and the invaders are causing drastic changes and damage to their new habitats. Next one is genetic pollution. Endemic species can be threatened with extinction through the process of genetic pollution, that is uncontrolled hybridization, introgression, and genetics swamping. Genetic pollution leads to homogenization or replacement of local genomes as a result of either a numerical or fitness advantage of an introduced species. Hybridization and introgression are the side effects of introduction and invasion. Another problem we have to mention here is that overexploitation. Overexploitation occurs when a resource is consumed at an alarming rate or an unsustainable rate. This occurs on land in the form of overhunting, excessive logging, poor soil conservation in agriculture, and illegal wildlife trade. Next is hybridization. In the field of agriculture and animal husbandry, after the advent of Green Revolution, hybridization have been popularized. Often hybridized breeds originated in developed countries and were further hybridized with local varieties in the developing world to create high-yield strains resistant to local climate and diseases. Local governments and industry have been pushing hybridization. Formerly, huge gene pools of various wild and indigenous breeds have collapsed, causing widespread genetic erosion and genetic pollution. Another factor we have to mention here is climatic change. Global warming is also considered to be a major potential threat to global biodiversity. For example, coral reefs, which are biodiversity hotspots, it will be lost in the coming 20 to 40 years if global warming is continuing at the present trend. Another one is human overpopulation. From 1950 to 2000, world population increased from 2.5 billion to 7 billion, and is forecasted that it will reach a plateau of 9 billion during the 21st century. The massive growth in human population through the 20th century has had more impact on biodiversity than any other single factor. At least until the middle of 21st century, worldwide loss of biodiversity depend on population growth itself. Need and method of conservation of biodiversity. Conserving biological diversity involves restoring, protecting, conserving or enhancing the variety of life in an area. The abundance and distribution of species and communities should be continued. The normal ecological functioning should not be obstructed. Today, our biosphere is in a danger of extinction for a variety of reasons like lack of conservation in ecological planning and destruction of natural habitats. The space is given over to either alternative uses or is overexploited or polluted, primarily because of environmental changes brought about by human beings. Methods of conservation of biodiversity. Conservation aims to protect the natural world and sustain biodiversity by carefully preserving and managing existing habitats and restoring areas which have been damaged or degraded. Species conservation can also take place outside the species natural habitat. For example, caring of an animal or an endangered species in captivity, such as in a zoo, or preserving endangered plants through the use of seed banks. Captive breeding is the process of breeding rare or endangered species in human-controlled environments with restricted settings such as wildlife preservation, zoo, and other conservation facilities. However, captive breeding techniques are usually difficult to implement for such highly mobile species as some migratory birds, for example cranes, and fishes like hilsa. But additionally, if the captive breeding population is too small, then inbreeding may occur due to the reduced gene. Next one is private farming. Whereas poaching substantially reduces endangered species, private farming does the opposite. It has substantially increased the population of the southern black rhinoceros and southern white rhinoceros. Local communities are having brought into the conservation programs. There are increasingly strong economic incentives in private farming like ecotourism. Conservation experts view the effort of China's turtle farming on the wild turtle population of China and Southeastern Asia. Next one is habitat preservation. The ideal solution is to protect habitats before they are damaged. This can be achieved through the creation of national parks and marine protected areas. However, it is important to note that many larger species require extensive territories and designated protected areas may not be large enough to accommodate or support them. Next one is habitat restoration. Where a habitat has already been degraded, it is sometimes possible to restore the habitat by carefully managing the land, removing invasive species, and reintroducing native species that had been lost from that area. Some species are bred in captivity or relocated from other areas for this purpose. Another method or measure what we can follow is ex situ conservation. Many endangered species are bred in captivity to preserve their numbers, and in some cases it is possible to reintroduce them to the wild. Some species like the golden arrow, poison frog have even been deliberately removed from the wild to protect them from the spread of disease and ensure that a small population is preserved. Plant species are often cultivated in nurseries and preserved via the use of seed banks. Next one is anti-poaching measures. In remote areas, guards are sometimes employed to protect endangered species such as the mountain gorilla from poachers, involving local communities in the protection of their wildlife whilst also providing some employment opportunities. Next one is wildlife corridors. Where habitats have been fragmented by divisions such as construction of roads, urban areas, or farmland, population becomes isolated and are unable to move throughout natural range to find sufficient resources, food, and mates. Wildlife corridors help to reconnect habitat fragments and maintain genetic biodiversity. Laws and policies. Some endangered species can be protected through law. The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species (CITE) is an international agreement between governments to ensure that trade in wild animals and plant specimens does not threaten their survival. Global Conventions on Conservation of Biodiversity. As all of us know, biodiversity is essential for maintaining the ecological functions, including stabilizing of water cycle, maintenance and replenishment of soil fertility, pollination and cross-fertilization of crops and other vegetations, protection against soil erosion, and stability of food producing and other ecosystems. Conservation of biological diversity leads to conservation of essential ecological diversity to preserve the continuity of food chains. Biodiversity provides the base of the livelihoods, cultures, and economies of several hundred million peoples, including farmers, fishermen, forest dwellers, and artisans. It provides raw material for a diverse medicinal and healthcare systems. It also provides the genetic base for continuous upgradation of agriculture, fisheries, and for critical discoveries in scientific, industrial, and other sectors. It is evident that this invaluable heritage is being destroyed at an alarming rate due to several reasons. Measures are being taken up at national and international level to address this issue. Some of the interventions are mentioned here. The first one is United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity (CBD). The Convention on Biological Diversity (CBD) is known informally as Biodiversity Convention, is a multilateral treaty. The convention has three main goals: conservation of biological diversity, sustainable use of its components, and third one, fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from genetic resources. Another one is Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. The Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety is an international agreement on biosafety as a supplement to Convention on Biological Diversity. The Biosafety Protocol seeks to protect biological diversity from the potential risk posed by genetically modified organisms resulting from modern biotechnology. This was adopted in January 2000. The Biosafety Protocol seeks to protect biological diversity from the potential risk posed by living modified organisms resulting from modern biotechnology. CITES is a multilateral treaty to protect endangered plants and animals. It was drafted as a result of a resolution adopted in 1963 at the meeting of members of International Union of Conservation of Nature (IUCN). The convention was opened for signature in 1973 and CITES entered into force on July 1, 1975. Its aim is to ensure that international trade in specimen of wild animals and plants does not threaten the survival of species in the world. Next is Ramsar Convention. The Ramsar Convention is an international treaty for the conservation and sustainable utilization of wetlands. It is named after the city of Ramsar in Iran, where the convention was signed in 1971. Bonn Convention (CMS). The Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, also known as the CMS or Bonn Convention, aims to conserve terrestrial, marine, and avian migratory species throughout their range. It is an intergovernmental treaty concluded under the aegis of the United Nations Environmental Programme, concerned with the conservation of wildlife and habitats on a global scale. The convention was signed in 1979 in Bonn, hence named after that, and entered into force in the year 1983. The UNESCO World Heritage Site, that is listed by UNESCO as a special cultural or physical significance. The list is maintained by International World Heritage Program, administered by UNESCO World Heritage Committee. The program catalogues, names and conserves sites of outstanding cultural and natural importance to the common heritage of humanity. Under certain conditions, listed sites can obtain funds from World Heritage Fund. Let's see some of the other agreements. There are many regional conventions related to biodiversity like APIA Convention and bilateral agreements such as the Japan-Australia Migratory Bird Agreement. Various access and benefit sharing agreements are also there. Laws regarding gene pool are only about the century old. Domestication and plant breeding methods are also not new. Advancement in genetic engineering have led to tighter laws covering distribution of genetically modified organisms, gene patents and process patents. Governments struggle to decide whether to focus on, for example, genes, genomes or organisms and species. Uniform approval for use of biodiversity as a legal standard has not been achieved. However, Bosselman argues that biodiversity should not be used as a legal standard, claiming that the remaining areas of scientific uncertainty cause unacceptable administrative waste and increase integration without promoting preservation goals. Biodiversity conservation in India. India has passed Biological Diversity Act in the year 2002 for the preservation of biological diversity in India and provides mechanism for equitable sharing of benefits arising out use of traditional biological resources and knowledge. The shocking death of many tigers and lions due to a mysterious diseases in our sanctuaries has brought wildlife conservation policies and their implementation into public focus. India has wide variety of wildlife. Many of them are endangered, ranging from the snow leopard in the Himalayas and to giant Malabar squirrel in the rainforest of Kerala. Wildlife conservation has been very much in forefront for government policy, and India is signatory to the conservation of international trade in endangered species. Enforcement of wildlife protection is done under the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. The Indian Board for Wildlife, that is IBWL, is the apex advisory body in the field of wildlife conservation in the country and is headed by our Prime Minister. There are several strategies adopted for conservation of nation's biodiversity. The first one is legislation itself. Formal policies and programs for conservation and sustainable utilization of biodiversity resources dates back to several decades. The concept of environmental protection is enshrined in the Indian Constitution in Article 48A and 51A. The major central acts relevant to biodiversity include Environment Protection Act 1986, Fisheries Act 1897, Forest Act 1927, Forest Conservation Act 1980, Wildlife Protection Act 1972 and Wildlife Protection Amendment Act 1991. Next one is in situ conservation. Conserving the animals and plants in their natural habitats is known as in situ conservation. Ex situ conservation of plants and animals preserve and protect them away from their natural habitat. This could be in zoological parks and botanical gardens or through the forestry institutions and agricultural research centers. The reintroduction of an animal or plant into habitat from where it has become extinct is another form of ex situ conservation. Next one is recording indigenous knowledge. The lives of local communities are closely interwoven with their environment and are dependent upon their immediate resources for meeting their needs. These local communities have a vast knowledge about local flora and fauna, which is very important for biodiversity conservation. Much of this knowledge is orally passed on from one generation to another generation. Next one is community participation in biodiversity conservation. It is being recognized that no legal provisions can be effective unless local communities are involved in planning, management, and monitoring of conservation programs. There are several initiatives to do this both by government as well as from NGOs. Successful conservation strategies will have to have the confidence and participation of the local communities. International conservation strategies. Conservation of biodiversity is not an issue confined to any one country or a community. It is a crucial global concern. Several international treaties and agreements, as we discussed in the earlier part of this lecture, are in place in the attempt of strengthening international participation and commitment towards conserving the global biodiversity.